what has happened last night and the attack. And yesterday we've learned Israel attacked Dahia finally. And the reason they attack, it's still somehow so strange what's going on, because they attacked Dahia. They thought that they're going to hit some Hezbollah commanders in a building. It seems that after the attack, they perceived that the building was empty and didn't hit anybody, but they killed some ordinary people in the region and close to that building. Then Iran said, if you attack, because Iran was warning the United States and Israel, if you attack Dahia, we're going to respond. I thought yesterday when I thought that Iran's response, since none of Hezbollah commanders was hit by the attack, Iran is not going to respond. Maybe Yemen going to respond to what what has happened in Dahia. Then Iran came out and said, no, we're going to hit Israel as we said before. And they fired something like 20 missiles to the northern part of Israel. From what we've seen so far, from the footages coming out of Israel or outside the region around Israel, since four of them hit the target. Then Israeli attack. Donald Trump came out saying, okay, you attack Dahia, Iran attacking you, that's it. You're not going to attack Iran, and I'm not going to support you attacking Iran. Then Benjamin Netanyahu said, as we know, he's running the show, and he attacked Iran, and Iran is responding right now. It's some sort of madness what's going on. What is your understanding of the situation in the West Asia?
Well, that was completely predictable. In fact, we knew it would happen like this. We know that Netanyahu wants to drag the US in a war in the Middle East. He wants to have the US militarily committed with troops in the Middle East. So that's a given fact. It has been said many times. It's a constant. In fact, it's the follow-up of a policy that has been implemented by Israel since the 1950s. So there is nothing new there. Now, as to the current situation, we have seen that Israel has constantly tried to drag. I mean, the U.S. understands that it has been trapped into this conflict. We know because that was published on the website of the State Department that the U.S. intervened at the request of Israel. Later, we have seen in a recent interview of Donald Trump that he said we shouldn't have been there. He acknowledged that the U.S. has nothing to do militarily in this region. And that's a situation that has been created by Israel. So everything was already clear from the very beginning. And each effort of Donald Trump to get out of this trap has been sabotaged by Netanyahu. And by the way, we have seen exactly the same thing when it comes to Ukraine and the US and Russia. Each time that Donald Trump tried to do something and tried to to establish some kind of dialogue with Russia, Ukraine and the Europeans managed their way to sabotage this. So we have, in fact, actors such as Zelensky in Ukraine, Netanyahu in Israel, who have identified Donald Trump as the weak link in the whole chain of command in the West, and they are trying to take advantage of this. Donald Trump has a too big ego to say that it was a mistake and it withdraws everything. He's trapped not just in a situation; he's trapped in his own ego, and everybody understands that the Trump is prisoner of himself in that sense. And that's exactly what Netanyahu is trying to use or misuse in order to have his own policy. He knows that the situation with Iran and in Lebanon has gone too far, and that the U.S. cannot withdraw. And therefore, if at best the U.S. want to stop, Netanyahu will make every effort to drag them further into the conflict. And that's exactly what we have. This is the fact that the building was empty or not plays absolutely no role, because we have already last week, by the way, discussed the question of the Dahia and the threats on Dahia. So they knew that Israel was about to attack Dahia, and Iran already last week has threatened Israel to respond to such an attack. So everything was clear. What the question is, why hasn't the US reacted stronger against Israel, knowing that Israel was about to attack Dahia? And that shows, as we have seen in Ukraine, by the way, that the Western, I mean, in that case, the US, but we can extend that to the European management or the crisis management, doesn't depart from a sober assessment of the situation. All this crisis management is the result of guts feeling, guts reaction, and in fact, are one-man shows. And you have a couple of advisors or individuals who may advise the decision makers, and we have that in the US. I mean, it's fascinating to see that in all the discussion we have seen in the past weeks or months between the US and Iran, the State Department seems to be absent from that. You know, the State Department, as in any country, is an apparatus designed to assess a situation, to provide element of language and things like this in order to solve situation. But apparently in the US, this is, I mean, the role of the State Department is not apparent. And we have exactly the same thing when it comes to France, Germany, UK, and even European Union. This is just a one-man show run by individuals, Ursula von der Leyen and or Kaja Kallas, Keir Starmer, and so on and so forth. But and each time they seem to react based on what they feel about the conflict, not about what is known about the conflict. It's probably just what they know about the conflict, but not even what is known about the conflict. I assume they have intelligence services who know what will happen. And in fact, in the US, we even know that the CIA and other intelligence agencies have warned against an attack against Iran. They knew how things will happen. But despite this, decision-making bypasses all these advices. So we have here an extremely simplistic decision-making process that avoids all the capabilities that we used to have in modern democratic government. And at the end of the day, the decision concentrates just around the brain of one individual. And if we can talk about brain, but that's another question. You see, and that's exactly where we are. And so the US, instead of reacting to the situation and starting to get on top of the problem, they seem to remain as a tool or a toy, even of Israel. Because as we see, who the person who is running the show in the conflict is Netanyahu, in fact. And Iran, on the other hand, understand that the only way to resist or to I mean, the only way to survive in this situation is to have a credible deterrent policy. And I insist on the word credible, because credible means that you show that you have the means to respond, and you have the means to respond with strength, efficiently. But the credibility is about the willingness to use those assets. And therefore, when the Israel threatens to attack Dahia, and Iran says, if you attack Dahia, we'll have to respond, they have to respond. Otherwise, their deterrence will not be credible. So that's where we have a situation that is extremely dangerous, because it can, in fact, create a kind of snowball effect and create a situation that worsens the whole situation. And Israel knows that. And they know that in order to keep the US involved in the region, they need to have a serious situation. And that's the reason why they continued this operation in Lebanon, although they haven't not even respected the ceasefire that was decided at end of 2024. And that's, in essence, the reason why the Hezbollah had to continue fighting, because Israel didn't comply. And this situation it has become kind of, let's say, a primer. If you talk about explosive, when you want to launch an explosion, you need to have a primer. And that's exactly what Lebanon is in this conflict, because Israel has limited capacities to attack Iran. But Lebanon is the best way to inflict damages, to gain territories. So Lebanon is the ideal primer for a conflict. And they are using that in order to escalate the conflict, and at the end to force the US to be committed again in the conflict. That's the mechanism of the whole thing. So all that was absolutely predictable. And in fact, we have said that the only way to get out of this conflict, that's the perverse consequence of this, because Iran has understood that. But I'm not sure that the Americans have understood that, and probably not even the Israelis. Not because they're not able to understand, but because they are too, convinced they are superior. But Iran has understood that in order to get out of this loop, the only way should be to completely destroy Israel, to have what I have mentioned many times, a decisive victory. And that's what Israel is trying to avoid, because they know that if they destroy Israel, that will probably trigger something that is unpredictable in the region. But that is the only way for Iran to get out of this situation, because of the fanaticism of the current government in Israel. Unless we have a change in Israel, and we have people who understand that we are in a loop that can only go towards escalation, and ultimately that can go to the erasure of Israel. Unless we have that, we are on the way of going to in that direction. And that's a situation that I think the West is not aware enough, because we keep being convinced that Iran has only limited response capabilities. And that's certainly not true. So that's a little bit how I assess the situation.
Yeah. Donald Trump said, right after seeing that both sides are attacking each other, Donald Trump came out and said Iran and Israel must immediately stop shooting. And this is the problem, Carl, that when they attacked Dahia, they said that the United States, Donald Trump came out and said, we didn't know about what's going on. But Israeli side said they had the green light of the United States to attack Dahia. And we have two different stories about the attack on Dahia. That's why Iran has decided, because there is no way Colonel, to control Israel.
Well, it's hard to tell who is telling the truth in all that, because first of all, you cannot trust Trump on that. You never know exactly what he means. He's always just hours away from a superb deal that's in favor of everybody, is solving the problem every day, is solving a new problem, but none of these problems are solved. He claims things that are obviously wrong and things like this. So that's one part, but that's part of the personality of Donald Trump. He wants to show in a very childish way, to some extent, how good he is, or how best he is, and things like this. The Israelis, in my view, are more, let's say, dangerous, because it might be that they said that if Iran does this, they will continue, and maybe they didn't receive any response from the US, and they consider that US has been informed, and they have accepted, and they have lighted the thing. From the Israeli side, I wouldn't trust them either. And I don't know exactly how the dynamics work. We understand that from what has happened in the last 3 months, that the US ultimately does what the Israelis want to do, period, because of internal pressure, because of many factors. In any case, the question here is that we should have obliged Israel to go back in its borders, or on the other side, since they don't have any border, let's say on the border of Lebanon, because this border is known. The one of Israel is not known. But let's say along the Green Line, the line of 1949. In any case, we should have forced that. We should have a UN. If the US were serious about the situation, they would have, with other countries, become convinced that other UN Security Council would agree with such an idea, if the US agrees, that Israel should withdraw to the Green Line, and that the UN should enforce a ceasefire. We already have the UNIFIL there, which is not mainly, but at least a big part of the UNIFIL are French troops, by the way. And we see that there's absolutely no activity of the UNIFIL in order to prevent the advance of the Israelis, although that would be their task. And that requires a decision from the UN Security Council to force Israel back into its border. And so we have the tools. We even have the troops already deployed there. We already have a mandate for these troops, but we don't want to apply it. So that means that we are not serious about this. In all the discussion we have, and when you talk to other people and think about the situation in Lebanon, nobody talks about the UNIFIL. But the UNIFIL, in fact, is deployed exactly in the area where the Israelis are deployed, meaning between the border of Lebanon, the southern border of Lebanon, and the Litani River, exactly where the Israeli forces are. So what is UNIFIL doing?
Carol, is it the same way that we have between northern Cyprus and the southern Cyprus? because there is a presence of the UN.
It's similar, but it's a different type of peacekeeping operation. In Cyprus, it's more like a ceasefire observation, in fact. But in Lebanon, this is more like a peacekeeping in the real sense of the word, because they have combatant, not just observers, but they have troops that are normally should be able to fight. And in fact, they used to fight. And the strange things, by the way, we had a report earlier this year that the French forces, for instance, were fighting Hezbollah. So we see that the UNIFIL mandate has been misused to avoid protecting Lebanon. It has been kind of a tool from some countries, troop contributing countries, to fight Hezbollah. And of course, this is also very disturbing, because you have a peacekeeping force that is supposed to impose the peace in the region and to prevent any invasion from Israel, because that was the initial purpose of the UNIFIL in this particular region. It was not just to observe, it was also to prevent. So it had a prevention and deterrent function in theory. But and then in this UNIFIL operation, you have many countries. You have probably 10 or 12 countries. I don't remember exactly. In any case, a large contingent is made up by the French forces. But strangely enough, the French government decided to define the Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. So, of course, that means that their mandate now is not just because if you consider Hezbollah as it is in Lebanon, they consider Hezbollah as a militia, but for the defense of Lebanon. They don't. Hezbollah is not considered as a terrorist organization in Lebanon. It's not part of the armed forces. But it has been granted a status, they were accepted, and they have a status to be there as a defense structure against external threats. I remind you that in the 80s, the Taif agreements were signed within Lebanon to disband all those militia that used to fight each other within Lebanon. But Hezbollah has never been an organization to fight other militias inside Lebanon. Hezbollah has always had as a mission, as a purpose, to fight the external threats, and namely the Israeli threat. And that's the reason why, despite having signed, within the Taif agreement, Hezbollah was granted the right to remain in place while other militias were disbanded. And with the idea that as soon as the Israelis would comply with the UN resolutions asking for the departure of Israel from Lebanon, then Hezbollah would disband. That's the mechanism. That's why when you start, and in that sense, Hezbollah was considered by the Lebanese government as a resistance movement, or a defense even movement, if you prefer. Now, since Israel keeps invading Hezbollah, keeps some Lebanese territory under its control since 1982, that, of course, justifies the presence of Hezbollah. And that justifies the fact that you have constant fights at the border between Hezbollah and the Israeli forces. And of course, Israel considers Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. But if you look at the history of the movement, if you look at the way the movement was developed and the rationale of the Hezbollah, including all these bunkers, tunnels, which are essentially defensive structures or infrastructures, meaning that Hezbollah has no claim over Israel. So the definition of terrorism is simply wrong. It cannot apply to Hezbollah. But Israel, as soon as they want to have the rest of the world helping them, they define individuals or some groups and so on as terrorists. So terrorists has nothing to do with the operational dimension of the group. It has to do with the political support Israel can gain through this idea of fighting terrorism. That's why, for instance, after the 9/11 in 2001, Israel tried to redefine the Palestinian organization as a member of Al-Qaeda in order to have the support of the Americans. They said, well, the Palestinians have the same purpose as Al-Qaeda in order to have this support. So it's a game from Israel to use different denomination in order to gain the political and military support from the rest of the world. And when you fight terrorism, you're essentially allowed to do anything. You can make torture, you can kill children, you can do all that. As long as you name them as terrorists, everything is allowed. And that's exactly how the West has operated in Iraq and things like that. In Iraq today, for instance, you have all these Kataib Hezbollah, Kataib Iman al-Ali, Ali, and so on and so forth. All these Kataibs are in fact resistance movement. They are resistance movement against the US military presence in Iraq. But they are considered as terrorist movement by Israelis, Europeans, and so on. In reality, they are simply resistant because the US should not be in Iraq in the first place. So we use the word terrorist just in order to fight them. And that's exactly what happens in Lebanon. And that's the reason why the UNIFIL cannot take side with Hezbollah, because that means they would take side with terrorists. And here you see, that's why when you have a peacekeeping operation, you need to have an impartial presence there. That's the purpose of peacekeeping operation. You cannot engage in a peacekeeping operation when you consider that one of the parties you are supposed to protect, because that's the purpose of a peacekeeping operation. You cannot be part of a peacekeeping operation when you consider one party to the conflict as a terrorist. You can't. And that's exactly the dilemma in which the UNIFIL is. And that's the dilemma in which the French forces, which is, by the way, a very important contingent, and that's also a contingent that is part of a country of the permanent member of the Security Council. Therefore, they have an important political role in this UNIFIL settings. But the French, in fact, are not impartial in that. And that's where you see how the way we understand our management of crisis is childish. And that's very much when you listen to Jean-Noël Barrot, the current Minister of Foreign Affairs, you understand that this is somebody who doesn't understand the whereabouts of what he does. He just wants to treat they are terrorists, they are this and that. It's just naming things and naming people